Okay, so this session is going to be a lot more fun, pretty basic. This is kind of our passion pieces, just how to do missions. And we could literally, you could come out here and we'll train you how to do missions every Friday and every day, because it's something you're always learning to do better. And you're always learning, oh, don't do it that way. Usually, this is just, we could say how to do missions, or you could say how to not do missions. Both are equally as important. We've definitely seen both and have done both. Done things well and done things well, maybe not so well. And so our goal for this time is to share with you some of the highlights, or just the big picture of how to do missions well, to get you thinking about, okay, if I do go do missions, what do I do when I get there? So now we've talked about who, we've talked about why, we've talked about what is a missionary, and now we're going to talk about, okay, how do I do missions then? What does it look like for me to engage in missionary activity amongst these unreached people groups of the world? So one of the first things we want to go into is what we call missionaries versus mercenaries. Do you want to say anything before we go into that?
No.
Okay. Okay. So missionaries versus mercenaries. And basically the idea behind this is the importance of having a structure of accountability wherever it is that you're going. You are not some Rambo, do it all myself, sent out from some YWAM base to go transform and change the world all by yourself. We really encourage people to strategically connect and partner and learn and go into the season of being a missionary as a learner, and not coming with all these preconceived ideas about how, you are going to come in and just save the world all by yourself. The second part of this mercenary versus missionary is how you give funds. One of the biggest problems we experience here on the mission field is donors from outside giving funds to locals directly without there being any relationship or accountability. And what happens with this is you create kind of a cottage industry of these local kind of Christian workers who find out that they can solicit funds from foreigners, and you can get all kinds of problems. So for example, the last 10 years in Cambodia, you've seen a huge crackdown on these quote unquote orphanages that were running, because what Cambodians quickly realized, they could set up kind of mercenary, not missionary. They're meaning not missionary by they're not working under anyone. I'm just some random Cambodian guy who met some foreigner, a Christian foreigner on vacation or whatever. Maybe I was driving him around, and the foreigner said, "Oh, look at the poor people here in Cambodia. I'm going to set up an orphanage here. Hey, Mr. Tuk-Tuk guy, would you want to do an orphanage with me?" And what these people have found is they could turn this orphanage thing into a little bit of a business for them. And so the more children they could get in their centers, the more donors would send them cash. And then sadly, since a lot of these orphanage directors weren't real Christians and had never been truly discipled and weren't equipped to deal with the parenting and loving and walking with these children in these children's homes, a lot of these kids got neglected, abused, and the sad situation is most of the children in these orphanages are not orphans. A lot of these orphanage directors would set up deals with parents in local villages. Some of them had one parent, some of them had no parents, some of them lived with their aunties or uncles and grandparents. But what these orphanage directors were doing were setting up this thing of, oh, hey, family in the village, if I have another kid, I can solicit $200 a month in support for that kid. It only cost me $50 a month for this kid to actually to feed him and shelter him. I pocket $150, so I'll send you 20 or 30 bucks a month. Let's say 50. I'll send you 50. It takes me 50 to actually raise your kid. And then I pocket a cool 50 bucks per kid on the side. And sadly, this was a huge problem here in Cambodia. Haiti has this, several other developing
all
nations.
over Africa.
All over Africa. And it's been an absolute travesty. And in the name of missions, in the name of people trying to do good, there's been a lot of hurting. This is books have been written called When Helping Hurts or Toxic Charity. And it's just been a rampant problem of funding these mercenaries, not missionaries. And you don't want to be one of these people, and you don't want to fund one of these people. So make sure you're going in as a humble learner and under accountability from your regional, international. We'll talk about structures a little bit. How do you need to walk in accountability and authority? But just basically, don't be a for-hire person. Don't go out and do your own thing thinking you're going to save the world. Come in humble, and don't just give money willy-nilly to anyone and everyone. Think strategically, think practically, and be a missionary, not a mercenary.
One of the things that we love about missions, and particularly YWAM, is YWAM is passionate about seeing young people empowered and released to accomplish the vision that God has placed within their heart through the giftings and talents He's given them. So as we begin to talk about the what of missions, really it kind of starts with God can use anything for you to use your passions on the mission field.
The how.
Oh,
no, the how.
The how. The how of missions. And sorry, these days are blurring together.
I know if you notice, we're getting a few of these days on the same day. We don't actually wear the same outfit every day.
Every day. We have babysitting and we're capitalizing on, So God can use any of your giftings and passions for how you want to serve Him, right? And that's so exciting, because I think another thing that hinders people sometimes from getting into missions is because they have this picture of, if I become a missionary, I don't get to use the things that I'm passionate about or get to do the things that I love. And we just want to say that that's absolutely not true. God created you for the purpose that He intended you for. And so whether it's art, whether it's music, whether it's sports, whether it's children, whether it's young people or old people, or if you have a heart for special needs or handicapped children, God can use all of those things in these nations where there are the least and the last of the lost that are in desperate need of the gospel message. And one of our favorite missions quotes is from John Piper. And he talks about God is most glorified when we are most satisfied in Him. When our heart is fulfilled doing what we were created to do, which is worshiping and loving and serving Him, God is glorified. That is a part of where people begin to be drawn unto God, because they see, wow, we've become fully alive. These people are fully alive as they live their lives of work and of purpose. And I mean, you've heard the quotes about, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life, and just being able to use those giftings that God has given you for His purpose is wonderful. And so within that, as you come to missions with a passion for music or children or a social justice issue, we want to frame it within these lessons that we've learned and give some guidelines and boundaries that can help you truly succeed. And so one of the first things that we see is that a lot of times people begin to divide the gospel message and social justice. There's humanitarian work. And sadly, we even sometimes see missionaries begin to call their work. And sometimes it's because they say it's, maybe they're working in sensitive areas or areas where they're a little bit cautious or afraid to call themselves missionaries. But they begin to, okay, well, I'm a humanitarian aid worker, or I'm a teacher, or I'm a this. And while there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, we also sometimes begin to see missionaries, focus shift off of the discipleship and the gospel message of what God has sent them and shift into some of the social justice humanitarian work of building a school, of helping the children, of feeding the poor. And what we want to just talk a little bit about is that when the focus shifts, these are all good things. They're all important. Obviously, we believe that it's hard for people to hear the gospel message if their stomach is empty and they are starving to death, and if people are sick and in need. We absolutely believe that God cares about the physical as well as the spiritual. But what we want to encourage is that he doesn't divide the two, and that his gospel message of love and life through Jesus brings health and wholeness without having to separate. I'm feeding these people and I don't have time to preach to them. Because as we've seen those things separated, that is where we see these dangers of the toxic charity, or the helping when helping hurts. It's about creating dependence where the locals literally have been hindered in their development because they've had so many people coming in to hand out food and hand out free things, where it's created the mentality that it's actually better if I don't work or if I don't get a job, because then the people will just continue to give me the free food and the free education for my children. And so what we really want to encourage you and just lay out a little bit, as Uriah talks about accountability and partnering and coming into new nations with a teachable heart and spirit, is that the gospel message, God's heart to disciple nations, is not just a message of Jesus loves you and here's social justice, here's some good things that I'm going to do for you, but it's a message of transforming people's hearts and minds and discipling them in a way that will transform their entire life, body, soul, and spirit altogether.
Yeah, sadly, sometimes we as missionaries think that we're somehow superior, and the reason that these countries are poor or whatever is because they just don't know what we know. Or one of the things I'm just dealing with lately is this whole issue of people being passionate about the anti-trafficking situation here in Cambodia. We understand that in Cambodia, there is an opportunity, wherever there's poor communities, there is an opportunity to exploit those poor communities in a greater way. And that's for sure a thing. But we were just talking about this and looking it up the other day. Did per capita, there are twice as many sex workers in the United States as there are in Cambodia. And yet, for whatever reason, everyone is passionate about stopping the trafficking here in Cambodia. Now, with that said, we are passionate about stopping trafficking in Cambodia. We are also passionate about stopping the trafficking in the United States. But you can kind of get this perspective of, well, don't worry about America, we're fine. Twice as many sex workers in the US as there are in Cambodia. And yet sometimes you can come in with your Western ideas of, well, America's so great and I'm just going to go save these poor little country. And let me tell you right now, Cambodia, Haiti, if you have coddling kills. And if you come in here and think, oh, poor little Cambodia, poor little Haiti, they're just so helpless. They are not. They are human beings created in the image of God. They have sovereign election and choice and a responsibility to make good decisions. And they choose wrong and they choose good based upon their sovereign given right to make decisions. And if you come in and think, oh, the poor, they're just victims of their circumstances, you can perpetuate the very problem and get them into a poverty or a victim mindset that makes them feel that their decisions are validated out of necessity and out of desperation. When in reality, when Cambodians can embrace who they are in Christ, when Cambodians see that they have the same resources and wherewithal internally, mentally, and spiritually to find work, to work hard, to love their families, to be faithful to their spouse, to raise their children, that there are resources in God ready to help them. That's when you begin to see transformation. That's why preaching the gospel needs to be our number one priority when we're getting involved in missions. Yes, we serve the community, and yes, we preach the gospel. Both are equally true. Evangelism and Mercy Ministries. But Mercy Ministries is mostly an open door for us that they need to see our love, because we know that people, is another good quote, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So you demonstrate love in practical ways so that you can have opportunities to share what will be a source providing love when you're even gone. That God himself in heaven wants to have relationship with them and will stand with them, help them, lift them out of poverty, because ultimately it is their responsibility that God has given them. We are not the ones who are going to save Cambodia. Cambodians working in partnership with the Holy Spirit and transformed lives from the gospel of Jesus Christ are going to be the ones to change Cambodia. Not us as missionaries, not us as foreigners. It's going to be them working as they understand and hear the gospel and have their lives transformed and are discipled into maturity. They will bring the change that God desires. It's not going to be the other way around.
It's so key. I mean, that was one of the foundational verses we started with a couple days ago, that their salvation is not found in anything else but Jesus. And we have history, research, statistics to back that up, that over the years, we have nations that have sought salvation through education. And Cuba brought in the best educational programs and will set up and we'll just educate the youth really well. And this will help our nation develop. Absolutely did not work. Cambodia had the
largest ever United Nations expenditure. I'm looking it up right now, the amount of money.
Money does not save.
Billions of dollars was spent trying to reestablish Cambodia in 1993. It's the largest humanitarian effort ever. Total failure. Thousands of workers, resources, millions, hundreds of millions of dollars spent. And still the same systemic issues today that were there in 1993. There's definite improvement, definite growth, but you can see that there's a brokenness within man that finances and that
education
and that just, good ideas and philosophy, it doesn't do it for it.
Jesus alone, only the gospel transforms hearts and minds in a way that will sustain and bring true development and transformation of nations. And so even as Christians, we have to be so careful that our good ideas, and this is why Uriah said, we really want to encourage that one of the first hows of missions is not to come with a plan that I have this great idea that to stop human trafficking in Cambodia, all we need to do is start a coffee shop. If there was a coffee shop that could provide jobs for these women, they would not be in their situation. And sadly, the reality just is that we have coffee shops here.
Yes.
We have coffee shops in America, and yet we know that the brokenness of the human heart and a life without Jesus still leads people to pursue the ease and facility of the sex work that gives them so much more money than working at a coffee shop job would every day. So again, not that we don't believe in businesses, missions, or not that there aren't good ideas, but let's be so careful that we don't come into something with our ideas about how we will save the people. We are here to bring the salvation of Jesus alone.
Yeah, sorry, it's $1.62 billion were spent in 1993 to 1996 to facilitate a transition of power and develop and rebuild Cambodia. It's the largest amount that the global community has ever spent trying to fix a country with money and manpower. It did not work. Most of what's been accomplished during those years was mostly undone in the coming years. And Cambodia has developed, but that $1.6 billion, thousands of workers working full-time around the clock, very little change happened. But yet we see nations like Korea, we see nations like Brazil, we see nations where when the gospel takes root and transforms the heart of men, to love their families, to work hard, to honor the government, to honor their mother and father, and restores the relationship between children and parents. It brings wholeness into a society that nothing can. And so we're big advocates of preaching the gospel and a big advocate of serving the poor as well.
So, as we encourage you to come in without a plan, but simply a purpose, your purpose is here to bring the gospel message of Jesus Christ. And the plan will form as you get here, as you learn the culture, as you learn the language, as you learn the true needs. A lot of times from the outside, and even as you first arrive, your first year, your first impressions of the place, we have these perceived ideas about what the real need is. Oh, I can see that this is what they need. This is what we need. And oftentimes those surface observations or perceptions that you have of a place are inaccurate, or they're distorted, or they're slightly skewed by, just your impressions of things, of your culture, your background. And so it's important to come in with the humility that you're there to learn, that you're there to truly see and receive God's heart for the nation, and where his gospel message can bring the transformation through the culture. It's interesting because even you want to be careful. In the very early days of missions, the white man came in and told the savage native that they must dress and sing and talk and do everything like the white man, right? And so over the last couple decades, we've seen a real swing, well, maybe not even a couple decades, maybe the last decade, a real swing of valuing and honoring culture. And it's interesting because that has its downsides as well, that we don't want to just leave a culture exactly as it is, because there are many things within cultures that do not honor God, that are not from him, that are not Christ and kingdom minded. And so we see that it's not that we want them to do everything in an American or a Western way, but at the same time, we don't want to just leave things the way that they are things. As the gospel and discipling in the way of biblical truth comes, there are certain things that need to shift and adjust, but at the same time, culture can be honored and used and respected. So as you come with a heart to learn, a teachable mindset, God will begin to share his vision and his plan and his purpose. And then you'll be able to structure a real plan that has all of the appropriate mindsets and worldviews that God will be beginning to implement into the culture as you bring his gospel message and the biblical truth. And so one of the unique parts is, in addition to our preconceived ideas or our plans, what can also sometimes happen is that we begin to feel external pressures from donors back home, or for some supporters. And, people also who have a heart to send or to give money will begin to contribute their
perspective and
opinions. And so you want to be a little bit careful. This is a little bit where we use the term mercenaries, but of following the money. All of a sudden you hear from back home that there's this project or this church group or this group organization that, has, wow, they've just got a ton of money that they're really looking to send to Cambodia or whatever region of the world to do water filters or to do orphanages, as Uriah already used. They have this specific slant of what, for whatever reason, their organization has chosen to focus on from this distant land of the West or Europe or wherever. And you really want to be very careful that we don't chase the money in the sense of aligning our projects or our plan to simply where the funds are coming. Well, that's where the money is, and so maybe we should just do these water filters. Do the people really need these filters, or are these filters appropriate for the area where we are? Is it sustainable? Is it useful? Not really, but that is where people want to give their money from. And so we just really encourage people. It's, again, just one of the big mistakes that we've seen, that either people begin doing projects that are not truly useful and therefore then sustainable, or effective, or they become a little bit dishonest with what they're really doing. Thank you for the money, and I'm not really going to do that, but I will take your money anyways. And so just following after the money, or the mercenary perspective that Uriah has kind of coined it. We just want to encourage people to be careful of that, of shaping your plan around donors or external good ideas.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we love water projects. We love medical outreach. We love serving in any way that our community truly desires.
Mm-hmm.
But what we have seen, you guys, is rather than external organizations contacting local workers and asking what it is that our community needs at any specific time, they'll contact us with their plans and what they want to do. And whether or not our community wants it or needs it, they can sometimes expect that our community here opens up the doors. And some people will be happy to facilitate that, particularly in poor developing nations, particularly around because finances and opportunity come in with this outside organizations. And so it's super important for us to align our plans. This is why our hearing God's voice is just so important with YWAM. It's right after, you know God, you make him known, and then you hear his voice. It's super foundational to who we are as YWAM, and it's what's so helpful to how we pioneer and how we approach missions, because it's what is God saying to you to focus on. But I would also say that God's voice isn't within a vacuum, as we would say. It's not, God doesn't just, you've had you hearing God's voice teaching, hopefully, and you know that it's always in line with scripture. It's always in submission to our authority that God's placed around us. And it's in line with what his previous words are. And I would just say that it's also in line with reality and in line with what is necessary and actually felt like. You will get a clearer picture of how God is speaking to you if you're willing to put in the time to listen and take your eyes and see the needs of your community and respond out of a compassionate heart that sees the need and wants to meet the need, rather than taking the perspective of what people want you to do or what you thought before you came to this unreached people group that they would need. And yeah, just staying humble, staying open. And like Naomi said, coming with a passion to make Jesus known. And you can have passion pieces, education, media. I want to do something in business. I want to do something in media. I want to do something in education. I want to do something in, community development. I want to do something in church planting. I want to do something in literacy. I want to do something in healthcare. Those are all general things. It's good that you can have a plan or a passion around. But like we really encourage, take the time to spend with the community you're trying to reach before you develop a specific plan, how you're going to implement that passion for you. And yeah, around donors, just be careful to not follow after the money and pursue what's actually felt needs of the community rather than complying with the desires of what donors want to do for communities.
Yeah. So as you come in with a desire to learn and to do this, we want to talk a little bit about culture, because obviously culture goes very deep. Culture, some people have described culture like an onion with all the layers. On the surface, we think of culture as being a lot of the foods and the spices that you eat, or the ethnic clothes that people wear, obviously the language or the way that people think or talk about different things. But as it goes deeper and deeper, obviously at the very, very core of what culture is the beliefs that people hold, the superstitions, the worldview, the perceptions that people many times can't even articulate why they do things a certain way. But because of the religion, which has influenced the way that they were raised, the superstitions that they hold, or the beliefs that they do, a fatalistic mentality, just this idea that, well, things are the way they are, and no matter what I do, they always will be this way, is quite deep within people, and is, I would say, one of the biggest oppositions to the gospel here in Cambodia, because, well, what does it matter what I do or I don't do, because things just are the way they are, because of this Buddhist belief of the karma and the previous choices of my reincarnated life before have given me this situation. And so whether it's poverty or sickness or just my lot in life, I'm kind of stuck with it. And it's removed a lot of the personal responsibility that the gospel message places on people, that you have a choice to make and you have decisions to follow after Christ that will then form and shape the world around you. And a lot of Buddhism about withdrawing and abdicating those responsibilities have shaped people's deep beliefs that even if they do decide to become a Christian and they say a prayer with you to Jesus, it's not a magical solution to their life being automatically changed. And so yes, we just want to talk a little bit about culture, and we have some practical steps that we'll give you as you come into a new country.
Yeah, culture is king. Like, it's context and culture, right? So when you come in to bring the gospel into any environment, any situation, you're going to be completely ill-equipped and unprepared to do it effectively until you do two things. One, you learn the culture. Two, you learn the language. When you communicate the gospel, it's going to travel along the lines, along the bridge of culture and language. If you're giving your English interpretation of the gospel and you don't understand the translated meaning of how people are perceiving the gospel, you can actually even accidentally preach a false gospel that people aren't understanding, that's not transformative, and that's not actually your goal.
True, yeah.
It's not true. The importance of understanding the gospel, it's a biblical principle, and it's something that all of us, the deeper we have an understanding of the gospel, I don't know about you, but for us, we're always understanding the gospel in deeper and more rich ways. And that comes through our linguistic and cultural filter. And until you can take the time to understand at least the basics of language and culture, you're always going to be very limited in your understanding of how the people that you're trying to reach think, the values they have, the desires and beliefs that they share, and how to bridge your message of the gospel to them will be very limited if you don't take the time to learn culture and learn language. We recommend at least 2 years of very, very intentional culture and language development. After being here for almost 17 years off and on in Cambodia, every day I think that not a day goes by that I don't learn more culture and more language. And we'll talk about this as a growth mindset, that you have to be a learner like you can't even imagine when you're entering into the missionary calling, because you're trying to learn something that you'll probably be learning for the rest of your life, and you probably won't ever fully grasp. But at the very least, that 2 years of intentional language and intentional cultural understanding will help you understand the framework to effectively communicate the gospel to the people you're trying to share it with.
So 3 very practical steps for adapting to culture. 3 S's. The first is smile. Unfortunately, as Uriah said earlier, we just see that many Christians just are not very friendly. And so particularly as you come into a new culture, and I would say if your personality is similar to mine, where maybe you're just not naturally extroverted, or even if you are extroverted and you feel a little bit out of your comfort zone. Interestingly enough, I think that often is reflected in kind of a negative face perception, just as far as just the discomfort and the uncomfort, and it can oftentimes come across as unfriendly. And you have to remember, especially if you don't speak the language, you can't communicate with words that you're wanting to be friendly and things. So just smile, and as you walk down the street, go through the market, remember that you are representing Christ and you're wanting to communicate his love through your eyes and through your face. And so as you enter into a new culture and into a new setting, just smiling and being intentional about connecting with people simply through your nonverbal cues it might seem so logical, or it might seem so dumb even to talk about this, but it's something that we literally don't see people do sometimes as they come.
Well, I always say we should just, like, the first question on every missionary application, it should be, do you like people? Just because, surprisingly, a lot of people get into ministry that seem to not really like people. And so that's strange for us. And definitely the smile thing is just super important.
And I think it's just an awareness of being intentional as you go out, that you're uncomfortable and it's not going to be easy to connect with people, but you are going to put on that smile and go for it. So the first thing is smile. The second is stop. A lot of times, I think as we get uncomfortable in situations, we either avoid people or we clump. If we're with a team or we're with people that we are comfortable with, we kind of just cling on to the people that we can communicate easily with, that are like us and that are easy and comfortable. But as you're smiling, as you're here for these people, as you're here to learn language and to learn culture, we just encourage you to go out and make an effort to stop as you pass by your neighbors. And this is an opportunity then for you to use what little language you do know, to practice the new phrase, the new word that you use, and to connect with them and to give them the time and to show them how much you care about them, even if you're limited in your ability to communicate that. You stopping will communicate that. And lastly, we have this word that we use, soak, in culture. And really what it is just taking the opportunity and the time to be in situations and to really kind of linger and wallow and just absorb the culture that is around you, even if you don't understand everything, even if you're uncomfortable, even if it's hot, even if you're tired. Sometimes we sit and we talk with people who talk about their 9 to 5 hours. Well, unfortunately, life on the mission field doesn't really work that way. Life happens 24/7 while you're here, and you're not only representing Jesus and the mission and the gospel that you've come to present during those office hours, you're representing him all the time. And so even though it's hard, even though it's tiring, even though it's uncomfortable, we just encourage you to find opportunities to sit and be with people, even if you don't understand everything. It's really actually quite a crucial part of language learning. And even as you are only learning bits and pieces of the language, you will be observing culture. You'll be learning and observing the things that form nonverbal communication. And it's an important part of adapting to a new area.
Yeah, it's kind of like a pickle. If you think of like how a cucumber, you put it in there, takes a while to turn into a pickle. And that last little bit that Naomi's saying, that soaking, you just have to expose yourself to grow and like just sit there with all the different language and all the different smells, and you eventually become like the people you're trying to reach in all the best ways. If you can expose yourself to just being surrounded by them. And that's quite helpful for language as well, is just exposing yourself to use it. Same three things just with the language. Nonverbal language, the stopping and using the few words, and then just soaking and listening. For like, you go to church on Sundays and you don't know what the pastor is saying for an hour or two, but you just let your brain hurt let your brain hurt and try to think and try to understand and let it fatigue itself. That's the formation of your brain learning the language and wrestling, the feeling that I need to understand this language. So for culture and language, that's super good, helpful advice. I think lastly, we just wanted to share a little bit about how we do missions, and highlight one core piece of before I get into the two kind of practicals of how Naomi and I, two of our passions, I just also would like to hit on what it means to disciple a nation. What does it mean when Jesus said, make disciples? We see that Jesus doesn't say, preach the gospel. It does say the gospel will be preached, but he doesn't specifically command you to go be an evangelist. He doesn't say, go out and do medical treatment for everyone. It doesn't say go out and educate everyone. He says to make disciples. And then it says, teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And this core little part of the Great Commission is sometimes that we often overlook. And we really encourage you guys to take a mindset of discipleship. You're in a discipleship training school. You're seeing this 3-month process of your staff doing one-on-ones with you. And what it's trying to do for you, hopefully, is it's teaching you and showing you the importance and the process of discipling someone, how it takes time, it takes relationship, it takes struggling with one another. Maybe you've gotten on your one-on-one's nerves, maybe your one-on-one's driving you crazy. They're trying to disciple you and you're trying to be discipled, and that's going to prepare you then to disciple others. And we see that the core of missions is a heart of discipleship. The mercy ministry, the proclaiming of the gospel, those things are all great. But the heart of this is you need spiritual parents. You need spiritual mothers and fathers who are going to put in the time and really deal with the issues in people's lives. And that's a lot of hard work, you guys. Just to prepare yourself for that undertaking of discipling, not just preaching, not just serving, but discipling people. And for passion pieces, Naomi and I just wanted to share with you guys just a real practical things. I'm really passionate about lately. Honestly, this isn't something I ever thought of in the past, but media, using social media, just because I've seen the fruit of it and the potential of it. When I came back into YWAM in 2015 and I saw several social media influencers getting millions of views, sharing the gospel. This guy named Marcus Rogers, Clayton Jennings, other Christian social media influencers. Marcus Rogers was just an army, like a sergeant, just a basic army guy, but he was using his social media platform to preach the gospel and reach millions of people. And then since then I've really been using social media. And with this video we're making right now, I was just kind of complaining. We've been filming all day, and I'll have to probably work on this for another 8-9 hours, editing and looking over everything. And so we were just talking about how important are digital communicators going to be in the next 10-20 years. And especially COVID has highlighted this to us like never before. Obviously we'd be with you guys if it wasn't for COVID. But this is a new reality. Using digital forms of communication is going to be the primary way of reaching the last and the lost that we're talking about in this missions things. So just encouraging those of you guys who are photographers, videographers, video editors, graphics design, people who are working in the digital communications medium. It's super powerful. We've seen literally millions of people, our largest video getting 2.5 million views. And we literally, everywhere we go in the country, people recognize us, know who we are, and follow us. And we've seen that open up massive doors. You guys will watch an introduction video about who we are, just the last update and what we're doing. And so you'll know a little bit more about that. But yeah, just encouraging you, if media is your passion, then it's an incredibly how to do missions. If you are a digital communicator, come to Cambodia. I'll show you how to do missions. Yeah.
And then for me, education is my passion. And as I talked about discipling nations and that Matthew 28 passage and teaching them everything I've commanded, have seen the value and importance of transforming people's minds. And for me particularly, it's easier to mold the mind as it's being formed than to try to change, people's ideas as they get older. And over the years, there's been research, and we talked about the 10-40 window the other day, but there's also what we call the 4 to 14 window, and it's become a big target emphasis as research and statistics have shown that people between the ages of 4 to 14 are more open to the gospel, and just the majority of people receive or encounter God at that age, and then as they are older and as they move out of that time, they are more set in their ways. And the percentage of people who receive the Lord or are open to the gospel outside of that diminishes as time goes on. And so even people who maybe do say a prayer or become a Christian later on, it's interesting that they'll often cite something that happened during the time of them being 4 to 14. A missionary came to my village, and I just remembered how kind they were, that they spent time with us. Or it's one of the precious things that we love about short-term teams, is particularly in the children's ministry and things, children are often marked by these brief encounters that they have with people, but somebody told them that Jesus loved them and they remembered that. And so yes, I'm very passionate about education and just the open doors that creates within a community to connect with families, which the stronger the family we can disciple and see a whole household come to know God, that's really where we see communities changed and nations that are formed from communities brought to whole transformation. And so as we work with parents and as we seek to keep children with their parents, one of the sad things about these orphanages or children's homes or any institution that takes children away from families, even children that don't have, maybe they've lost one of their parents, or even if they've lost both of their parents, any opportunity that they're able to stay within a family union, so grandparents or aunts or uncles, or even really seeking to see like sort of community foster care things set up within communities. Children thrive best within a family setting rather than being raised by an institution or organization. And so really discipling and inputting into these kinds of things helps prevent things like human trafficking, or really, like Uriah was saying, just disciples children in a way that instills the dignity and the value and the self-worth of their identity, and helps them not be at risk for things like sex trafficking and sex work later on in life, and really pursuing the education that they need to then pursue hard work and building a better life for themselves and their family into the future as they learn those biblical principles and are discipled.
So yeah, whether it's media, education, or however business, however you feel called, sports, there's so many different ways you can serve in missions. But what we would really just say as we wrap this lesson up to you guys is just do it. Nike wasn't messing around when they made that logo. It's our number one value here at our base. Our number one, why we have 4 values. One is implement. Second is improve. Third is transparency, and 4th is effectiveness. But that first one is implement, and the way we say it simply is just get her done. It's just get it done. And Danny Lehman, he's one of my favorite YWAM teachers, and he says, I like the way I do evangelism better than the way you don't do evangelism. And it's so easy to be critical or nitpicky as to methods or strategies of how to do missions. But at the end of the day, doing it, obedience is better than sacrifice. And simply obeying God's call to become a missionary and to give your life to make the gospel known where it isn't is ultimately the goal. And you'll learn along the way. Mm-hmm. You'll learn, you'll get better, and you'll improve. That's our third and our second is improve. Once you get it done, once you go for it, you improve along the way. And the third is our value is transparency. And fourth is effectiveness. And we believe that as you're open and honest with people and you walk humbly as your missions experience, it'll allow you to be open and honest, which then leads to greater effectiveness for God's kingdom. And that's what we desire, not for our own sake, but for the glory of God and the souls of men, knowing that the more effective we are, the more people are going to be brought into eternity and the more joy it brings to the heart of the Father. And so just in how to do missions, just do it. At the end of the day, make a commitment, step out in faith, and know that wherever you go, God's going to use you to bring transformation into the lives of people. So,
some people dream success. Don't let your dreams be dreams. You should get to the point where anyone else will quit, and you're not going to stop there. So just do it. Make your dreams come true. Do it. Nothing is impossible. Do it. Make your dreams come true. Yes,